So Hazbin Hotel came out recently, and I'm a little mixed on it. Sure, this has been a very ambitious project that's been in the works for years now, but while there was obviously a lot of love and effort put into its presentation, there were some choices in the final product that just left me scratching my head. Though that's not to say it wasn't a worthwhile watch. Not really that much else to say, so let's begin. The pilot starts with a song being sung by our main character, Charlie, which serves to introduce us to the world of hell. Now, there have been many different interpretations of hell in the past. Some portray it as a pit of eternal despair or extreme punishment, while others have it be way more chill. Hazbin strikes a sort of middle ground between the two, with the hell we see being analogous to the grimiest city you've ever been to. Drugs, graffiti, prostitution, murder, criminals running rampant violence, but no litter. That's how you know they have standards. Now, as for the visuals, Vivziepop is already pretty well known for very thoughtful and detailed character designs, and wow, does it show! There are not two demons that look alike. Those don't count. Those don't count either. I mean, just look at the variety on display. You've got Beetlejuice, you've got Pennywise, there's ancient Egyptians, Medusas, voodoo dolls, Maxwell Adams, the creator of Billy and Mandy. There are references to Vivzi's other work. There's Squashini, Jason, Sugar Skull, zombies, hybrids, dragons, bandits, chair. And he's sitting on a couch! Honestly, this is quite the monster mash we've got here, especially since most versions of Hell tend to only have goats, imps, red devils, and Cerberus. He's always there. This is such a colorful, quirky world that it almost makes you forget that Hazbin literally takes place in Hell. You know, eternal damnation and whatnot. It's a setting that's normally portrayed as a pretty frightening environment, but here it really isn't. What we're shown isn't gross, it's not scary, it's not even that raunchy either. There's like a handful of gross things in there, most of which go by so fast that you wouldn't even notice them unless you're the type of person who goes and watches things frame by frame. It's a common trend among adult cartoons to go the extreme gross-out route, but Hazbin keeps it restrained for the most part, which is impressive considering one of the main characters is literally a porn star. Now that's the point for taste if I've ever seen it. So the main premise of Hazbin is that every year, angels descend upon hell with the goal of hindering overpopulation by slaughtering demons left and right. But Charlie here thinks that's complete horseradish, and so she opens a hotel meant to rehabilitate demons who pass through, with hopes that demons who check in from hell will check out into heaven, and thus remove the need for an annual extermination. When Charlie wraps up her song, we see a lone demon fall from the sky, presumably having just died and likely unfamiliar with how hell operates. So at first, it seems like it's gonna be another main character is introduced to a new place and needs to have everything explained for them so the viewer knows what's going on, even though there's probably more subtle ways to convey the exact same information type of deal. But thankfully, instead of all that, he gets hit by a car and we meet Angel Dust, who's the actual main character that the scene serves to introduce. And this nobody was actually just fodder for a really clever bait-and-switch gag. As long as you didn't watch any of the promos, which kind of spoil who everyone is. By the way, we'll get to those. For now, we're introduced to Angel Dust, our second main character, male prostitute, porn star, drug addict, and spider person, who after getting dropped off goes to a vending machine to get some drugs, but then someone steals the drugs before getting flattened by a boulder in cartoonish fashion, which is actually a very confusing moment because not 1 minute earlier, newbie guy here was brutalized by a car, and we got to witness his death in a very gruesome, detailed fashion. But then right after that, this guy gets smashed by a boulder and seems to be fine. No blood, no guts, nothing. Which is cartoonishly comedic to be sure, but is still a pretty weird bit of tone whiplash, where it feels like the show didn't exactly know what it's trying to go for. The rest of the pilot seems to adopt more of a Looney Tunes-esque approach to its visual humor, which is also a bit jarring because Hazbin at the same time tries to push a story about preventing people from being murdered in the streets. What? So is this a serious story or a lighthearted cartoon? You can't talk about characters being brutally killed but then also show those characters surviving things that should have killed them, especially since the former is the driving factor for the plot. Oh hey, and speaking of which, there was actually a scene in one of the trailers that shows an angel during an extermination. However, this scene interestingly didn't make it into the final product. Was it cut for time? Maybe they scrapped it when they realized they wanted to take the opening in a different direction, but that also means that we're not really shown what an extermination is like. We see the aftermath, sure, but that's not really much. And so whenever it's referenced, the pilot ends up having to do a lot of telling instead of showing, which just adds to the confusion over how exactly death works in this universe, which again, we'll get to. For now, there's some destruction in the distance, and we meet our first setup antagonist, Sir Pentious, a half king cobra, half rattlesnake, out-of-touch dapper creature who aims to usurp all of hell so everyone can see how superior he is. Actually, let me rephrase that first part because that doesn't even come close to summarizing Pentious' design. This guy is just the most. He wears a hat with an eye and a smile, he has a cobra hood with an eye pattern, and when it's retracted he wears it like a mullet. He has eternal pink eye, a suit and tie, and his tail has a stripe pattern studded with even more eyes, as if the one on his hat, the one on his suit, and the two on his face weren't enough. It's all just so busy and cluttered, like they were trying to fill the design with as many things as possible. And so the average viewer doesn't really know where to look. The hat, the tail, the hood? Instead of accenting the design, these extra details distract from it. Especially the eyes on the tail, which is where the design really loses me. Maybe if in the future they could tone down his design a bit, I think that could really go a long way. Like maybe if the eyes were dark spots instead of being bright red. Or maybe if they were just gone completely. Also, what the heck is up with the audio mixing at the beginning of this scene? The music is so loud that it almost drowns out Pentious' voice.
Those other cowardly sinners dare not hinder my territorial takeover. A wise decision.
Which is weird because in the promo for this scene that was released before the whole thing came out, the musical cue was nowhere near this obnoxious.
Those other cowardly sinners dare not hinder my territorial takeover. A wise decision. Those other cowardly sinners dare not hinder my territorial takeover. A wise decision.
I have no clue why they felt the need to do this, but we'll get to the sound design a little more shortly. For now, someone calls Pentious out and a bomb bursts through the window. But before the initial crash happens, there's a weird sound effect of a steaming pot that's played, as if to build up to the crash.
That wasn't us, Mr. Boss Man.
And this kind of grinds against what seemed like the intended effect of the moment, where some unknown voice calls out, it's silent, and then all of a sudden there's an attack, which is what this moment was like in the preview.
That wasn't us, Mr. Boss Man.
Oh! By adding this effect here, the sound of the smashing window is greatly lessened by removing the juxtaposition in the sound. And unfortunately, this isn't the last example of the Hazbin crew going obnoxiously overboard with effects. So let's put a pin in that for now and continue. So a fight breaks out between Sir Pentious and newcomer Cherry Bomb, which will be important later, and the scene cuts to a news broadcast of the event. And while there have been a lot of questionable decisions regarding the changes made from the previews, for the most part, this scene actually was touched up pretty well. They added this old TV visual effect, and there's a cutoff at the end to help better transition into the next scene, where we finally meet Charlie proper alongside her girlfriend Vaggie. Up until this point, we've seen nothing but despair, seemingly endless cycles of violence, demons laying dead in the streets, citywide destruction, and everyone just being brutal and nasty to each other, which is why it's such an uplifting change of pace when Charlie finally comes in. She's just such a lovable bundle of joy who exudes so much positive energy that you'd be hard-pressed not to root for her. In fact, I think that Charlie is actually what makes Hazbin Hotel as a whole so compelling, since she plays the role of the straight man that the audience can grapple onto in this unfamiliar, insane world. And I guarantee you that a majority of Hazbin's audience wouldn't have stuck around if it weren't for Charlie just being a little basket of sweetness.
The highlighted bits are the best parts.
It's all highlighted.
You sit on a throne of lies.
During the break, Charlie walks on set and we formally meet Katie Killjoy, the second setup antagonist, practically the opposite of sweet and serves as a major foil to Charlie. Both are powerful icons of hell, both have the same color palette of black, white, red, and blonde, and both can't do what they do alone. But unlike Charlie, Katie is cold and pessimistic, finding great success and comfort in the annual extermination. And her relationship with Tom is blatantly abusive, a stark contrast to the healthy relationship Charlie has with Vaggie. As far as villains for this show goes, Killjoy is definitely my favorite so far, although I guess that's not really saying much. Alright, time to take that pin out. A consistently prevalent problem that plagues Hazbin Hotel like a persistently plucky parasite is its sound design. More specifically, its sound effects. I already talked about how they were misused in Cherry Bomb's introduction, but it is all over the pilot. And it's very noticeable once you watch the teaser videos again, where for the most part, these effects aren't even there. Which was the case with the Cherry Bomb example, but another good example is the broadcast scene, where Killjoy pours coffee on Tom's lap. And in the teaser, it immediately cuts to her continuing with the broadcast as if nothing happened, which was both funny and showcased Killjoy's brutal personality as well, as it seemed like she legitimately didn't give a shit about Tom's pain. But then comes the final version, and now when it comes to Katie with the broadcast, you can hear Tom squealing in the background.
Coming up next, we have an exclusive interview with the daughter of Hell's own head honcho, who's here to discuss her brand new passion project.
Which makes the cut less snappy, on top of making the dialogue here harder to pay attention to because Tom's pain keeps interrupting it. And there could have been a joke there, like maybe some bits where Killjoy is looking over as if she's annoyed by Tom's whinnying, but she completely ignores the sounds and so they end up just feeling unnecessary and tacked on. Not to mention annoying. In almost every instance of this happening, the sound effects are always either too loud or just plain overused. Like in this scene where Charlie meets Katie Killjoy for the first time.
Look, my time is money, so I'll keep this short. You're not here because we wanted you here. You're here because Jeffrey couldn't make it for his cannibal cooking segment. You might be some royal big shot, but that doesn't mean shit to me. I'm too rich and too influential to give a flying fuck about what some tux-wearing demon princess wants to advertise. So don't get cute with me, honey, or I will fucking bury you.
And we're live!
Welcome back!
And it's especially noticeable since a lot of the sounds they added are non-diegetic and don't actually exist in the world. Like, why the heck was there an oven sound when Killjoy mentioned a cooking segment that wasn't being held? Why was that put in there? Were they trying to emulate Ed, Edd n Eddy's sound design? But if that's the case, then why are all the sound effects being used during dialogue? In Ed, Edd n Eddy, overusing effects to the point of absurdity was usually reserved for moments filled with wild slapstick, with the sound serving to assist in exaggerating the insane antics that were unfolding on screen. And it seemed like Hazbin was trying to do the same thing, exaggerate the sounds for cartoonish effect. However, it just comes off as jarring because Hazbin's presentation doesn't match this sound style. Despite all the wicked visuals, Hazbin isn't actually driven by action, it's driven by dialogue, just like Rick and Morty. And yes, the pilot is mostly dialogue, which is why it's so egregious that every other scene has elements thrown in that are just plain distracting. And this whole mess really is just another example of Hazbin not knowing what it wants to be. Alright, anyway, back to the plot. Literally, since this is the part where Charlie explains the plot of the show, once the interview starts, Charlie announces the unveiling of the Happy Hotel, where sinners can come in, repent for their sins, and finally reach paradise. And this whole premise is actually quite emblematic of Charlie's character, as she adamantly tries to see the good in a world filled with evil.
Look, every single one of you has something good deep down inside.
I think every
demon
has something special inside of them. They just have to discover what it is.
Though the other demons don't seem to share her optimistic view, so she tries to sway them with a song that's absolutely bananas. And it's a stark contrast from the opening song, which was very melancholic and subdued to better illustrate the emotional impact of the annual extermination. Meanwhile, this one is very cheery and moves so fast that you would be forgiven for not being able to keep up. So much is happening on screen in such a short time that it just exudes this wildly chaotic kinetic energy. Unfortunately, though, Charlie's enthusiasm over this project ends up convincing herself more than anyone else. And so when she's done, we're treated to an absolutely disparaging scene where all of the other demons laugh at her like the idea of redemption is the funniest thing they've ever heard. Oh my god, that absolutely breaks my heart.
What in the 9 circles makes you think a single denizen of hell would give 2 shits about becoming a better person? You have no proof that this little experiment even works!
Although Katie Killjoy does actually bring up an interesting point here. As the main character, it's easy for the audience to believe that Charlie's dream is feasible, but when you really look at it, no one, not even Charlie herself, really knows for sure if rehabilitating demons so hard that they become angels is even something that can happen. The demons of hell laughing her off stage aren't just being stupid or close-minded. Charlie's goal really does sound like a bold and wild claim with no backing, which is what makes this premise so interesting because, like Charlie, the viewer too wants to believe that redemption is possible because of how nice and optimistic it sounds. Dare I say, we have to have faith that it can work? Yeah, when this show does religious stuff, it does it really subtly, which is why I would argue that Hazbin is actually very light on the religious aspect in general. Sure, it takes place in hell, but the location is really only skin deep. They could easily change the name to Demonland or something stupid like that, and it would still work. Not to mention that there are practically no biblical references to be found other than the forbidden fruit appearing multiple times, and Lucifer being named in the show description and during one instance from the script. Anyway, after facing Killjoy's intense scrutiny, Charlie tries to defend her cause by revealing that Angel Dust from before has been staying at the hotel. But then it turns out that as they're being broadcast, Angel is currently helping Cherry Bomb fight in the turf war against Pentious. And while that sounds very convenient, I think this moment was actually very well foreshadowed. When we first met Angel, he told his patron to keep what he was doing discreet, as if he couldn't let someone in particular know that he was doing jobs for people, which at first we assumed was because it would hurt his rep with his boss Val, but it turns out it was actually because doing that sort of thing derails his rehabilitation at the hotel. Plus, there was also that shot of Angel looking on at Pentious' ship, alluding to the upcoming brawl, the reveal of which puts Charlie on the spot while the other demons continue to belittle her.
Tell us, how does it feel to be such a total failure?
Yeah, well, how does it feel that I got your pen, huh? Bitch!
So after the interview, Charlie and Vaggie pick Angel up in the limo and head back to the hotel. Charlie is down because everyone thinks her dream is a joke, Angel doesn't seem to really care, and Vaggie is freaking pissed because Angel's carelessness irreparably damaged the hotel's reputation. And when confronted about this, he really doesn't do much in the way of making it right.
I'm gonna kill him.
Too late, Toots. Wait! Would that make me double dead? Where exactly do I go? To double hell? Sorry, you're stuck with me, bitch. Get used to it.
Now, when I first saw this part, I was expecting Vaggie to chime in and explain how death works in Hell, since, you know, it's kind of important to the plot, but instead they just kind of gloss over it. From Angel's dialogue here, it would seem that demon souls are immortal, as Angel mocks the idea of dying a second time, but from the opening song, Charlie's proposition during the interview, and Vaggie's concerns a little later, it's shown that demons can be killed and that their souls can be lost forever. So which is it? Are the characters mortal or immortal? Some consistency, please! So anyway, everyone arrives back at the hotel. Charlie sits down, sad, and there's a short moment where Angel almost shows her a little sympathy, but then walks away, possibly setting up a future character arc relating to Angel's rehabilitation. And interestingly, this isn't the only time when Angel shows a little humanity, because there was actually a part during the Brawl where he pushed Cherry out of the way of danger. So redemption isn't actually out of the question for him. Anyway, Charlie goes outside to call her mother, which may be setting up another character arc about Charlie having to prove herself to her parents. Side note, am I the only one who's getting Firelord Ozai vibes from Charlie's dad? He's kept in shadows for all of his appearances in the pilot, minus the portraits of him hanging in the hotel. Now, normally I'd think that sort of shatters the build-up a bit by already revealing what Charlie's father looks like, but the way they deliberately show us this portrait in particular could likely mean that the Lucifer from before is somehow different from the Lucifer now, which could add an extra layer to the arc. So after leaving a message, Charlie goes back inside, but then all of a sudden there's a knock at the door. And I know I've been bringing up the teaser videos a lot during this review, so I thought I'd take some time to go over how much the next scene was really improved upon the preview version. First of all, they cleaned up the animation here so that the demon at the door looks more intimidating. Angel's animation here was off, so they redid it, and while they were at it, corrected a few other errors and toned down the patterns on Angel's head. They changed the background here so that it's less busy. The lighting effects in general are much better, and they corrected an audio sync error in one of Charlie's lines.
The radio demon is at the door. The radio demon is at the door.
Although the caveat of that is that now the line begins when her mouth is still closed.
What?
The radio demon is at the door.
What?
Who?
What should I do?
Well, don't let him in.
She then proceeds to let him in. And here we meet Alistair, our final main character, who's basically Hazbin's version of Bill or Discord, a character who's completely unpredictable and is more interested in redirecting the hero rather than assisting or impeding them, on top of having an undefined amount of power. And because prankster-type characters like this are always a wildcard, the potential for what they could do with Alistair is practically limitless. Top all that off with his weird radio host persona, plus his sadistic personality, and it's no wonder why he's a fan favorite. Although, and I promise that this is the last of it, at one point during Alistair's introduction, the screen flashes an awful lot, which is way more than it was before. Now, going back to the original, I can see how they felt that this wasn't enough, but here they just really go overboard with the effects. Like, gosh, I can barely see him now. Also, for some reason at the end, there are dozens of animation and sound credits, yet not a single editing credit. Why not? And it's especially odd since most of the problems I'm encountering in this pilot are with the editing. Anyway, Alistair proposes to help Charlie with the hotel, even though he too doesn't believe redemption to be possible, and even gives us some insight into how one might think there are no second chances in this world.
So, does this mean that you think it's possible to rehabilitate a demon?
Of course not! That's wacky nonsense! Redemption, oh, the non-existent humanity! No. I don't think there's anything left that could save such loathsome sinners. The chance given was the life they lived before. The punishment is this! There is no undoing what is done.
It was one thing to hear that from a villain, but to hear it coming from a main character really hits home how much work it'll take to make Charlie's insane dream a reality. And as the two of them discuss this suspicious proposition further, Vaggie explains Alistair's background to Angel, and by extension the audience, because apparently he's never heard of him before. Which is the very thing that I praise Hazbin for not doing earlier with that roadkill demon. And although this segment is pretty wicked cool, like just check out the variety of ways they drew Alistair to convey pure evil. Also, near the end of this section when Vaggie says most ancient and destructive evils, we see quite a few familiar faces that made cameos earlier in the pilot, which I think can only mean that these fellows are already prepped for antagonistic roles in the future. Anyway, Vaggie tells Charlie not to trust him, Alistair references Perfect Blue, and Charlie gets him on board with the project. Although Alistair thinks the hotel's staffing conditions are a bit subpar, so he summons in a few last-minute additions to the cast. To be the hotel's maid, he brings in Nifty, who is a child in hell without any parents. There's a story there, I'm sure. And then to man the front desk, he summons Husker, a crude, alcoholic gambler who's also a little over-designed, with the wings and poker symbols and whatnot, but thankfully it's nowhere near as bad as it was with Sir Edgelord.
Pardon?
Also, in a really old video on Vivzie's channel, she put together what she imagined a lot of these characters would sound like before they got official voices. And it turns out that the voice she imagined for Husker was, get this, Rick. Yeah, as if the influence wasn't already strong enough. Well shoot, now I can't look at Husker without imagining what it would be like if Justin Roiland did his voice.
Does evil exist? And if so, can one detect and measure it? Rhetorical question, Morty. The answer's yes.
And with that, the hotel finally has what it needs to get off the ground. And Charlie is absolutely ecstatic about it.
Oh my gosh! Welcome to the Happy Hotel! You are going to love it here!
I lost the ability to love years ago,
said the guy who's covered in hearts. So after demonstrating just how well he can aid Charlie in achieving her dream, Alistair has a song which is a half reprise, half parody of Charlie's song from before, and really showcases the duality between the two through the contents of the respective lyrics alone.
I have a dream, I'm here to tell about a wonderful, fantastic new hotel.
You have a dream, you wish to tell, and it's just laughable, but hey kid, what the hell?
Inside of every demon is a rainbow, inside every sinner is a shiny smile.
Inside of every demon is a lost cause, but we'll dress them up for now with just a smile.
We can turn around, they'll be heaven bound with just a little time down at the Happy Hotel.
Here below the ground, I'm sure your plan is sound. They'll spend a little time down at this Hazbin Hotel.
But then the song is interrupted as Sir Pentious apparently followed Angel back to the hotel and is now out for revenge.
Ha! Well, well, well. Look who it is harboring the striped freak.
Look who's talking. But luckily for the gang, just as the great philosopher Thanos, no last name, snapped his fingers to prevent overpopulation, Alistair too does the same and reduces the immediate threat to dust. Now, there are two reactions to be had here. First of all, holy crap, Alistair is a monster who you don't want to piss off or he'll kill your family. But also, oh my god, Alistair just saved the hotel. Jeez, good thing he's on our side, huh? Definitely. And so after that display, the gang heads inside for some jambalaya. Sir Pentious is revealed to still be alive after the credits and the pilot ends.
Wow! That was
actually pretty good. Hazbin Hotel is wildly imaginative and exudes love and creativity from every crevice, which is why it's such a shame that the tone is so confused since it really gets in the way of letting Hazbin run wild. I talked about a lot of things, but the biggest thing really is that Hazbin doesn't quite know what it wants to be. Does it want to be like Rick and Morty with all its gore, witty dialogue, and wild imagery? Or does it want to be like Ed, Edd and Eddy or the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy with all their cartoonish slapstick, abundant sound effects, and lighter tone? Is this a world where death has consequence, or is it one where characters can survive anything? And as a result of all this confusion, we got a product that wasn't over the top, yet not grounded in reality either. So which should it be? Well, if there ends up being way more dialogue than visual stuff in any future projects, which was the case this time around, then it really ought to lean toward the latter. Reduce the volume of the sound effects and some musical cues so that they aren't as intrusive to the dialogue, seriously cool it with how many sound effects they think they need to put in, and lastly, figure out if they want to have demons spilling blood and guts or cartoonishly survive whatever the world throws at them. If Hazbin is set to become a full series, then the tone is the most important issue that the crew really ought to address. As for the pilot itself, it does a really good job at setting up the show, as it has practically every base covered. It sets up our main lead, 3 other main characters, 3 supporting characters, 2 antagonists, and a plethora of additional faces. It sets up the world, the conflict, potential arcs, we get a good feel for the art style and animation, the sound is another story, but I already talked to death about that, and it opens the doors for stories that would be very interesting to follow. Although on the other hand, because the pilot is trying to set up so many things at once, its pacing is complete whack. There are alright transitions, but for the most part the story feels very segmented. Like, here's the part where we introduce this thing, then the one where we introduce that thing, then the one where this happens. It's no wonder Hazbin seemed so natural when split between previews, because each part already felt separate. As I said before, this pilot is mostly just dialogue. Granted, it's really good, really well presented dialogue, but still dialogue nonetheless. Because so much stuff needs to be established, an extended amount of time has to be spent explaining who characters are, how things work, motivations, etc. And if you look closely, the pilot doesn't really have a plot. Sure, there's a turf war in an interview, and of course there's the overarching conflict, but that all ends around halfway through and the remaining time is just spent hanging out at the hotel. Now for a pilot, that kind of odd format is fine, since their main purpose is to sell people on the show rather than stand on their own. But for an actual episode trying to tell a cohesive story, it would be a problem if there was no narrative flow or proper structure. Like, imagine if in Rick Potion 9, Rick were to solve the epidemic on his first try and the rest of the episode was just Morty at the dance with Jessica. It wouldn't be right for the main conflict to just be resolved when there's still a sizable amount of episode left. And it's clear why it was done like this, because when the interview was over, they still needed to establish Alistair, who is a main character. But now that everything is established, it shouldn't be too hard for the show to continue from where the pilot left off. And the potential for Hazbin as a series is astronomical. I swear to God, the show will be worth watching just to see all the designs. Not to mention all the awesome background details like Bojack, the fake drug from Bojack Horseman, the we couldn't think of a pun for our shop but we sell hard drugs drugstore, these two eggs making out with each other, this text at the bottom of the broadcast which is just a total riot, and the hotel is filled with paintings that reveal all sorts of things, like Charlie and Vaggie going to not Disneyland together. Oh, and there's also a portion of the Dover Boys playing in the bar, which by the way, is that a reference to Vivziepop taking part in the Dover Boys reanimated collab? And I guess while we're on the subject of backgrounds, Hazbin also can't seem to figure out if it wants backgrounds to be blurry in order to add focus to the characters in the foreground, or if it wants viewers to be able to see everything the background has to offer. Because there are some shots where the former is the case, and others where the latter is the case. Again, it's weirdly inconsistent, and also a little disappointing in the case of the former because it's very clear that a lot of effort and passion were put into these backgrounds. The buildings in the distance are all crooked and uniquely unidentical. Sir Pentious is a snake, so the walls of his lair are lined with scales. Oh yeah, and the hotel is like... oh my god, just look at it! So much detail and so much thought went into this place and it really shows. From all of the exaggerated features on the outside to the demonic furniture and intricately designed wallpapers lining the inside, the hotel is the perfect hub for the show. Now when it comes to voice acting in pilots, it's not uncommon for voices to be swapped out between the pilot and the actual show. For example, in the Invader Zim pilot, Zim was voiced by Billy West, but in the show he was voiced by Richard Steven Horvitz, who also plays a character in HELLUVA Boss, Vivzie's other pilot, which also takes place in the same hell as Hazbin. I didn't mean for it to come full circle like that, but the point is, if they're going to replace anyone, I really don't know who they would change other than maybe Husker? Oh man, could you imagine if the Husker Rick thing actually managed to happen? As for the other voices, they're all top-notch. The voice for Katie Killjoy absolutely sells the snobby celebrity persona, the actor for Charlie brings a lot of energy to the role, and I swear to God, Angel's voice is so fitting that I legitimately have trouble imagining him with a different voice.
Not some kind of brothel man cave.
Shut up! Shut up! We are keeping this.
But of course, that's assuming Hazbin gets picked up at all. Personally, while there are still a few problems that need to be ironed out, I really don't want this to become another dropped pilot. Though I guess while we're on that subject, who would pick up Hazbin anyway? Vivzie has said that she doesn't want to spend another couple years just making episode 2, so staying on the internet is a no-go. Adult Swim would be ideal, but then all the swearing would have to be censored. Oh yeah, there's Netflix. They don't censor stuff, so maybe, oh, dang, I don't know. Oh wait, what if Alistair sponsored it? He's no stranger to supporting small startups, even if it is just so we can watch them repeatedly trip and tumble down to the fiery pit of failure.
Right.